A man in a navy jacket and dark jeans walks up to a display table inside a memorabilia auction house in Scottsdale, Arizona, picks up a signed photograph, and is told, loudly in a room full of people, that the signature on it is not real, not disputed, not uncertain. Fake. The man telling him this is a collector named Harlan Voss, who has been in this room for every major auction for the past 9 years, who owns 4,200 authenticated pieces, and who has spent 31 years learning to tell the difference between what is genuine and what has been made to look that way. The man being told, this is the person who signed it. He does not say so. Not immediately. He sets the photograph back down on the table, smooths the edge of it with 2 fingers, and looks at Harlan Voss the way you look at someone when you have decided to be patient before you have decided what patience will cost you. Harlan Voss does not notice the look. He has already turned to the woman beside him. "I've seen better fakes," he says, "but not many." The room did not fall apart right then. It fell apart 11 minutes later, in a way that nobody in it, not Harlan Voss, not the auction staff, not the 63 people browsing the floor, was prepared for. There is an auction house on North Scottsdale Road called Meridian Vault. It has occupied the same 2-story building for 17 years, and in that time, it has become one of the most respected entertainment memorabilia houses in the American Southwest, which is not the largest territory, but is not nothing. The specialty is film and television, signed photographs, screen-used props, call sheets, costume pieces, the physical residue of productions that people have strong feelings about. The main floor is a single open room, climate-controlled to 68 degrees year-round, the humidity kept at a specific level the owner can tell you without looking it up. The display cases are hardwood and museum glass. The lighting is warm and directional, designed to illuminate provenance labels without creating glare. Nothing in the room is placed carelessly. The owner, a woman named Susan Ellerby, who has run Meridian Vault since its 2nd year, has opinions about display that she has refined over 15 years and that her staff have long since stopped debating. The pieces on sale that Thursday ranged in value from $400, a signed headshot from a television actor whose show ran for 2 seasons in the mid-90s and whose fans remained intensely loyal, to $47,000, which was the opening bid on a fully costumed mannequin from a science fiction film, whose anniversary year had driven collector interest to a level Susan had not seen since the early days of a particular fantasy franchise she was still paying off her good fortune on. The auction began at 6 in the evening. Preview hours ran from 2 to 5:30. It was at 4:40 in the afternoon, during preview, with 63 registered bidders moving through the room, that Harlan Voss stopped at table 11 and picked up the signed photograph and said what he said. The man who had signed it was standing 2 feet away. He had come in at 4:15, alone, in a navy jacket worn soft at the lapels and dark jeans and leather shoes that were clean, but not new. He had a lanyard that said Preview Guest because Susan Ellerby had sent him one, as she sent them to anyone whose material was in the auction. And he had put it on without ceremony and walked the floor the way a person walks a museum, slowly, with genuine interest, stopping where something caught his attention. He had stopped at table 11 because the photograph was one he remembered. His name was Harlan Voss, and he had been collecting entertainment memorabilia for 31 years, which meant he had started at 26, which was the year he saw his first piece sell at auction for a number that struck him as both unreasonable and clarifying. Unreasonable because it was a signed index card, nothing more than a name on a 3x5 piece of paper, and clarifying because the room full of people who had bid on it understood something he immediately understood too, that the signature was not the thing. The thing was the proof of a moment. A real person's hand, pressing real ink into real paper, at a real point in time. The index card was a fixed point in a world that did not have many. He was a large man, 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with the careful movements of someone who has learned that his own size can be misread. He kept his gray hair trimmed close and wore, on auction days, a navy jacket that he had owned for 11 years and considered a kind of uniform. He had a reputation in the memorabilia community that could be described, depending on who was doing the describing, as expert or exacting, or in the accounting of people who had been on the wrong end of his assessments. Simply hard. He had been born in Flagstaff, 60 miles north of where he now lived, in a house that his father had built himself over the course of 3 years on a lot he had bought with savings from 12 years of working maintenance at a ski resort. The house was not large. It was precise. Every joint fitted, every threshold level, because his father was a man who believed that the quality of a thing was the quality of the attention given to it, and that the attention given to a thing was a form of respect for the person who would eventually live inside it. His father had also been a collector of a different kind, not memorabilia, but tools. Levels and squares and marking gauges, some of them inherited. Some of them purchased, each one stored with the same deliberate care. Harlan had grown up understanding that an object was not only what it was, but what it proved, about the person who made it, the person who used it, the standard it had been held to. The collection had started with a signed photograph of a director whose films had meant something to him when he was young, purchased for $220 at an estate sale in Tempe. He had it authenticated. The authentication confirmed it. He had kept it for 3 years and then sold it for $1,100, which was a number that told him something about what he had learned in those 3 years that he had not known before. By the time he was 40, he owned 800 authenticated pieces. By the time he was 52, the number was 4,200. And the expertise he had built was genuine. Not the performed expertise of a man who has learned to sound certain, but the worked expertise of someone who has spent 3 decades studying the specific variables of pressure and ink and the individual biomechanics of a hand committing a name to a surface. He had authenticated pieces for 3 auction houses, 2 museums, and 1 estate attorney handling a collection that had gone to probate. He was right about the calls he made. He knew it. He was not humble about it in the way that some experts are humble, the kind of humility that is itself a form of performance. He was simply accurate, and he treated accuracy as the standard by which everything else was measured. What he did not do, and this was the thing his wife of 24 years had named for him 11 years ago, in a conversation that had not gone well, and that he had thought about more since than he had in the immediate aftermath, was account for the cost of being right in public, for the difference between correcting the record and correcting the person, for the way that certainty, delivered without care for who is standing in front of you, can be a form of cruelty even when it is accurate. He had not changed this about himself. He was working on it. He had been working on it for 11 years. On a Thursday afternoon in Scottsdale, Arizona, at Table 11, it was still not finished. The photograph was a still from a production, a posed shot, the kind taken on set during principal photography, printed at 8 by 10, signed across the lower right corner in a hand that Harlan had assessed in under 4 seconds. He knew this signature. He had authenticated 3 pieces from this same source over the past 6 years, and he had studied the baseline enough to recognize the tells. The pressure was wrong. The loop on the K was closed where it should be open. The terminal stroke came left, when this signer, in Harlan's experience, always pulled right. He said it before he had finished the sentence in his head that would have counseled him to wait. This is a fake. Not quietly. The room was not quiet, but his voice carried the particular authority of a man who has been the expert in a room long enough that the room adjusts to him. The woman beside him, a collector named Frances Oakes, who had been at Meridian Vault Auctions for 7 years and who trusted Harlan's eye more than most, looked at the photograph. "You're sure? The K is wrong," he said, "and the terminal stroke. See how it comes left? It doesn't come left. I've got 3 authenticated pieces from this same source. It doesn't come left." He said it again, to no one in particular, in the way of a man making a record rather than a conversation. Not many better fakes, but this is one. He had already moved on in his mind to the next table. He had not looked up. He had not looked at the man standing 2 feet away, who had set the photograph back down on the table and smoothed the edge of it with 2 fingers, and was now standing very still. His name was on the lanyard. Not Keanu Reeves, because that was not how Susan Ellerby's system worked. The lanyard said preview guest and the name of the auction, because discretion was part of the service, and the people who came to Meridian Vault's preview hours as principals did not generally want to announce themselves. But Susan Ellerby was standing at the edge of the room, and she had seen what had happened, and she was moving. She reached table 11 in under 20 seconds. She said quietly to Harlan, "I need to introduce you to someone." Harlan turned. He looked at the man in the navy jacket. He looked at the lanyard. He looked at the face. The face was not anonymous. Harlan Voss had been studying signatures for 31 years. He had studied the photograph at table 11 many times over the past 6 years of authentication work. He knew, from that study, what the man who had signed it looked like. He had simply not connected, in the compressed moment of assessment, the man 2 feet away with the name on the photograph. He made that connection now. The room, as he would say later to his wife, did not spin. It simply rearranged itself into a configuration he had not prepared for. "I believe," Susan said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who ran auctions for a living and understood that the right sentence delivered at the right moment was worth more than any explanation that followed, "that you have a question about a signature." Harlan Voss looked at Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves looked at Harlan Voss. "I can sign it again," he said, "if that would help." It was not a joke. He said it the way a person says a thing that is simply true, with no particular weight on it, because it did not need weight. The offer was direct and practical and contained no trap. He picked up the photograph from table 11 and held it, and looked at Harlan Voss with the steady attention of a man waiting to be told what would actually be useful. Harlan could not speak for a moment. Around them, the room had gone the particular quality of quiet that happens when 63 people become aware simultaneously that something is occurring that they did not expect and do not want to miss. Frances Oakes, who had known Harlan Voss for 7 years and had never seen him without a ready sentence, was watching him with an expression that was somewhere between sympathy and the specific satisfaction of watching a man she respected confront the limits of what he was certain about. Susan Ellerby said, to no one in particular, "Mr. Reeves very kindly brought some additional pieces for the preview." Harlan found his voice. "The terminal stroke," he said. He said it to Keanu Reeves directly, because Harlan Voss was a man who, when he had said something wrong in public, said the thing that was wrong rather than the apology that was easier. In my authenticated examples, the terminal stroke pulls right. This one comes left. A pause. "I was going left that day," Keanu Reeves said. "I remember the set. We'd been shooting since 4 in the morning, and I was signing between takes, and I was tired, and I was going left." He looked at the photograph. "I sign differently when I'm tired." Harlan looked at the photograph. He looked at the signature. He thought about 3 decades of studying the biomechanics of a hand on a surface. He thought about his father's levels and squares, each one stored with deliberate care. He thought about the difference between studying a thing and knowing the thing that made it. "I owe you an apology," he said. Not to Susan, not to Francis, to the man in front of him. "I said it loudly," he said, "and I said it before I had finished checking. And I was wrong." Keanu Reeves looked at him for a moment. "You weren't entirely wrong," he said. "You were right that something was different. You didn't know why. That's not the same as being wrong. I announced it. You did. In a room full of people. You did." A pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that holds something rather than avoiding it. "I've got 3 authenticated examples," Harlan said. "I know what the standard looks like. I don't know what the exceptions look like, because I've never been able to ask. What do you want to know?" Harlan looked at him. It was the question he had been waiting 31 years for someone to ask him, and it had arrived from the person he had just publicly accused of forging his own name. And Harlan Voss was not a man given to moments of visible feeling, but something moved in him that the room could see even if they could not name it. "Everything," he said. Keanu Reeves pulled out the chair beside table 11 and sat down. "Then sit down," he said. Harlan sat. They talked for 41 minutes. Susan Ellerby, who should have been managing preview hour with the precise attention she gave to every auction, found herself doing very little managing. The floor staff moved quietly. The 63 registered bidders moved quietly. The room had achieved the particular stillness of people who understand that they are present for something that is not on the catalog. Keanu Reeves described, in the specific terms that Harlan Voss needed, every variation he had ever noticed in his own signature. What changed when he was tired? What changed when he was rushing? What changed over the years as the hand aged and the muscles adapted, and the habits of a lifetime shifted by degrees? He talked about the photographs he had signed in parking lots, and on set, and at airports, and outside hospitals, and the way the surface changed the output, and the way the pen mattered, and the way the day mattered more than people thought. Harlan listened with the quality of attention he gave to authenticated pieces, complete, active, recording. At some point, Frances Oakes quietly took out a small notebook and began writing things down. She was not sure for whom. She wrote them down anyway. At the 40-minute mark, Harlan said, "The 3 authenticated examples I have. What year?" Keanu Reeves thought about it. He named the approximate range. "All the same period," Harlan said. "Before the variation started. Before I started going left when I was tired," Keanu said. "Yes," Harlan looked at the photograph from table 11. "This is authentic," he said. It was not an apology. It was a correction of the record, which was the form that mattered to him. "I was wrong in the method and wrong in the conclusion, and I said both loudly in a room that didn't need to hear either." "It's a good room," Keanu Reeves said. "Rooms like this need people who can tell the difference. You just needed more data. I should have waited for the data." "Yes," he said. "But most people don't know what data they're missing. You knew something was different. That's where it starts." He stood up. He shook Harlan's hand. He picked up the photograph from table 11 and signed the back of it, on the blank white space of the reverse, in the hand he used on good mornings when he was not tired and not rushing, the hand that pulled right and closed the loop on the K, and whose terminal stroke Harlan Voss had spent 6 years studying without ever knowing it was the wrong day's version. "Now you have a comparison," he said. He handed it back. He thanked Susan Ellerby for the invitation. He said something brief and specific to the floor staffer who had been nearest to table 11 during the exchange. a young man named Colby, 22 years old, who had been working previews for 4 months and had gone very still when the moment began and had remained still throughout, and who Keanu Reeves had been aware of the entire time. "You handled that well," he said to Colby. "Staying out of it when it needed to resolve itself, that's harder than it looks." Colby said he appreciated that. He left the way he arrived, through the front door, no ceremony, into the parking lot where the Scottsdale afternoon was still warm at 5 o'clock in October. The auction ran that evening from 6 to 10. Lot 47, the signed photograph from Table 11, with the secondary signature on the reverse, was not in the original catalog. Susan Ellerby added it in the 40 minutes between the end of preview and the start of the auction, with a notation that read, "Dual signature, single piece, both signatures authenticated, provenance verified on site." She set the opening bid at $3,200. It sold for $11,400. The winning bidder was Frances Oakes. She kept it on the wall of her study in Tempe, Arizona, not because of the value, which was real, but because of the notation on the back of the catalog entry that she had kept, both signatures authenticated, provenance verified on site. She liked the phrase. It seemed to her to contain something larger than it said. Harlan Voss drove home to his house in North Scottsdale that evening and told his wife what had happened. He told her all of it. The announcement, the face, the 41 minutes, the signed reverse. He told it in the kitchen over the dinner she had kept warm, which was something she still did on auction nights because he was often late and had often not eaten, and the habit was too old to break. She listened without interrupting, which was her practice when he was telling her something that mattered. When he finished, she said, "The thing I said 11 years ago." "Yes," he said, "that's the thing you were working on." "Yes, how does it feel?" He thought about it. "Like the work isn't done," he said, "but like I can see what the next part of it looks like." She looked at him. "That's the first time you've said it that way," she said. He did not argue with her, because she was right. He ate the dinner. He was quiet for most of it, not in the way of a man avoiding something, but in the way of a man sitting with something that had just changed shape. In the months that followed, Harlan Voss changed one practice. Only one. It was small enough that most people who encountered him in auction rooms did not notice it. The people who had known him for a long time noticed it, because with people who have long been a particular way, small changes are visible even when they cannot be named. He started waiting. Not longer. Not dramatically longer. 4 seconds instead of 1. 6 seconds instead of 3. Long enough to finish the sentence in his head before it became the sentence in the room. He was not always successful. He was right more often than he was wrong about the calls themselves, and the correctness was still there. But the window between knowing and saying opened slightly, and in that window, occasionally, was something he had not been able to see before. The person standing in front of him, who was not the object he was assessing, and who did not need to be in the room when the assessment landed. He authenticated 9 pieces for Meridian Vault over the following 2 years. Susan Ellerby noted, in a conversation with Frances Oakes that was not intended as a report but functioned as one, that Harlan had begun flagging uncertainties rather than conclusions, sending notes that said possible variation, would benefit from comparison, rather than the cleaner and faster and more final verdicts he had previously preferred. "He's almost more useful this way," Susan said. "He was always useful," Frances said. "Now he's also right about what he doesn't know." Colby, the floor staffer who had gone still at Table 11, stayed at Meridian Vault for 3 more years. He moved into auction coordination, and then catalog production, where his particular quality of attention The ability to remain present in a room without inserting himself into what was happening turned out to be exactly the skill that good catalog work required. He could sit with a piece for 40 minutes and produce a description that was accurate and specific without being inflated, which was rarer in auction writing than you might think. He kept a note on his work desk that he had written the evening after the Thursday preview. It said, in his own handwriting, "Staying out of it when it needs to resolve itself." That's harder than it looks. He had written it down so he would not forget who had told him. I have been thinking about what it is to be wrong in a room full of people. Most of us have been wrong in a room full of people. It is one of the more durable human experiences, and it does not improve with repetition. The wrongness itself is not the worst part. The worst part is the specific arithmetic of having announced the thing before you finish checking, and then having to account for the gap between what you said and what was true, in front of everyone who heard you say it. Harlan Voss handled that arithmetic the way the framework demanded, by naming the error precisely, without deflection, in the same room where the error had been made. Not because it was comfortable, because it was what the record required. What I keep coming back to is the other side of it. The person who had just been publicly accused of forging his own name, who could have made something very different of those 11 minutes, who had every reasonable cause to let the room do what rooms do when they witness something like that, and who instead pulled out a chair and sat down and said, "What do you want to know?" That is not the response the moment calls for. It is the response the situation needed. I am not sure I know the difference between those two things. Instinctively, I suspect most of us don't. But there are people who do, who can read a room in which they have been wronged and see, underneath the immediate shape of it, what is actually being asked for, and give that instead. He gave it, and the room that had been falling apart came back together around it. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for patience and the specific grace of people who do not need a grievance to define what happens next. If something in this one stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me what you took from it. Share it with someone who might need it today. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. See you in the next one.